the decades after independence, you had millions rushing into the cities because that was that was where the action was. And many of them settled in places which were floodplains and encroaching water bodies, right? So slowly you started losing the water and you started digging underground. And now you're in a place where you're supposed to get water from outside and everybody wants their share of that water when it comes in. And then you're running out of water inside the city because you've just exhausted all your resources that you have. Now let's go into the future, right? You go into climate change. And in India, to me, climate change is not about carbon. Climate change is entirely about water. Once you put these three things, the fact that you're losing your storage, something that you need to buffer your water across the year, something ideally suited to a place which has such temporally skewed rainfall. You've got rid of that. Your insurance, which was under the ground, which is your groundwater, you've got rid of that. And now you've got climate change coming in, saying, hey, I'm going to shrink your resources even.
The first imperative is to rebuild the commons. I mean, it is the commons, stupid. I mean, cities are all about that. If you're not able to create commons, and if you do not use the means at your disposal, such as environmental management or management of food supply chains, for instance, to create equal cities, then you're losing an opportunity here. And that brings me to the second sort of imperative, which is to recognize that, it's all about the people. The commons are about people. And we must understand two things there. One, the basic definition of sustainability that the Brundtland Commission gave us in the 1980s, which is essentially that we as today's generations are leaving a legacy for future generations. And sustainability is about making sure that we do not create conditions that prevent future generations from living their lives and achieving their capabilities. The other aspect here is the politics. And again, Mr. Maira talked about politics, and I think only an aware citizen, which is all of us, can contribute to a changed politics. If we want to alter the politics about cities and about urbanization, which we should do if we want to protect ourselves from the damages that urbanization is causing, then we need to be part of the measuring, the reporting, the monitoring of the performance of the city itself. The third imperative is for society to really engage in a debate about public goods and trade-offs. What do we lose when we don't build 5 blocks of housing but restore a park instead? What do we lose? What do we gain? I think there are some tasks which our audience and everybody today can get really involved in. And these, in a sense, make these imperatives become more tangible. One is that the city will need to be recrafted. The second is that at a planning level, at a larger sort of regional level, we need to talk about how equal standards of infrastructure and services and opportunity, therefore, because those enable opportunity, equal standards are ubiquitous across the country, whether you're in urban or rural areas.
Thinking through what are the bottlenecks at the implementation side, there is no silver bullet. So, that's why even in the book, I say first 2 weeks, just observe your pattern, right? Collect the data of who generates your waste, where you generate, what you generate. For 2 weeks, don't do anything, just observe. Second thing, make it as easy as possible, right? If you rely on conscience is the most unreliable friend when you want to create a habit.
A city is not a physical system, it's a social system. So in social systems, you have to not just observe, you got to listen. And what you have to do very much is to listen to people not like yourself. And this is what is missing in the world today. We are listening to people like ourselves, and from which we derive what the people out there who seem different to us should be given the benefit of. That's not what really matters to them even. They don't care for what you care for, perhaps, and thank goodness. But they start caring for what you care for and they wanted to be rich like you, we'll make the world a bigger mess to do this. So this quality of listening to people not like yourself, deeply listening, is the first foundational discipline?
I think the answer is that, one, we must understand the limits of government, right? Because there is a limit, and there ought to be a limit as well. You don't want, this is a pretty American ethos, but essentially you don't want government in your face. And e-governance and digitalization of governmental, feedback loops and such like have gained ground. They're not altogether bad. I think we should welcome the opportunity and see how inclusive that can become, how universalized our participatory governance systems can become.
You've got to look at public benefit, because the metrics you're using is the return on investment by what people pay in that enterprise. But society is a bigger enterprise. So some parts you invest in and you get benefits elsewhere. So unless you have a scheme for evaluating overall well-being, you will keep trying to optimize the parts. And then goes to the private thing, a private enterprise. So every part must look after itself and be. So, and then many people would say ideologically, but that's the only way things should be. I mean, this is going much further with Friedman and Reagan. So there is a big ideological matter here, please, around the world. And we say socialism, and then we denigrate the term because we have our own experiences of what we thought was a socialism, which was top-down planning, which again in cities is the wrong way to go. So top-down planning doesn't work, but we think that is socialism, and that's why they found what. Whereas, yes, private enterprise, small enterprise, our informal sector works, and we want more of that. But as I point out, there are certain things which a private person cannot produce for everybody unless the rest invest in that.
This whole thing, if you just look at state comfort as time saved over longer distances, a public transport beats a car hands down, even today in Indian cities. And I think, then you get into an image problem. I don't want to get into this crappy, overcrowded, non-air conditioned, dirty bus. And I think that there is a part of it in your mind, and there is a part of it which is real. And I think those are fixable, but we need to understand that.
When it comes to infrastructure, whether it's transportation or water supply or sanitation or any of this, and you know sanitation very well, better than any of us, the importance is to have a very clear idea of roles and responsibilities. It's very clear. It is not enough for a mere as in, a single executive engineer in an engineering department in the city cannot, control decisions, nor can the commissioner alone control decisions. Ultimately, governance of cities is a collective enterprise. It may bubble up into certain hierarchies. That's a separate issue, but cities are good for people, and people have to manage cities. Right, and all of us are intermediaries, so to speak, in that. Right, and there is great economic logic to it, because it is ultimately the people that produce wealth. There is a great logic in terms of maintaining peace, security, inclusivity, universal access for people who live with disabilities. There are ethos questions here which we must settle before we are able to make those large policy changes, because we are a deeply divided society which has found ways to overcome divisions, but there are many things, such as the way that market economies work, for instance, which also push those divisions into becoming scars and wounds. So we've got to take that holistic view.
We need collective action involving all the stakeholders. And that will only happen if you have a shared understanding of the problems we are facing today. Not about 2050 and 2100. It's about the problems we are facing today. And if you have enough empathy and compassion to address those collectively, so that we can have a better life for all of us. If we can evaluate our own quality of life beyond rupees and dollars, then we start appreciating all the other things where we can create value and benefit for ourselves, the self-interest, which can spur us into action on these important issues.